Well, this is Straight Talk, and as part of our election special, we are talking to the leaders, and we're very honoured tonight to have David Seymour with us, leader of the ACT Party. David, welcome. We really appreciate your time because we know it's an incredibly busy time for you. And so we'll just get straight into it. The panellists have got some questions. Some of the missing panellists have sent through their questions. So Dr. Michael Reid is going to kick off with the first question.
Yes, good evening, David. David, ACT is a party based on libertarian values, which favour freedom of choice and expression, but these can be at odds with conservative and faith-based values, for example, the euthanasia legislation and the liberalising of abortion. So why should people with these values vote for ACT?
I think it's out of respect for tolerance and choice. Of course, we expect religious tolerance, even though a lot of faith-based values are at odds with other people's beliefs. We wouldn't ask, well, why should people have those beliefs if not everyone accepts them? We would say, actually, we think that everybody should be able to have their own way of life. So long as it does not harm others, they should be allowed to do so. And they shouldn't recruit the government to try and enforce their version of faith or spirituality on others. So, for example, while you may disagree with assisted dying, it's quite another thing to have the state enlisted to try and prevent other people from doing it. Similarly, you may be opposed to abortion, but it's quite another thing to ask the state to basically chase pregnant women and force them to take pregnancies to term against their will when they might not otherwise do so. So really, it's a question not of values, it's a question of what you think the role of government is. My view is that people of faith are far better at trying to persuade others rather than force upon others their views, because once you go down that latter track, you actually attack the very tolerance that is required for all of us to practice our faith and beliefs.
David, you've talked about wanting to expand the criteria for euthanasia, which you mentioned there. How far do you want to expand the criteria? I mean, overseas it can include children, disabilities. Canada is moving towards mental illness, qualifying from next year, people sick of living. How far does that expansion go?
Well, I'm not going to get into an argument about your mischaracterization of overseas law, but what I will say is that
what mischaracterization was there? I mean, that is the case, isn't it?
The idea that you can have assisted dying because you're tired of living, I mean, that's not legal in any country. But in any event, I believe that the assisted dying bill that I introduced to Parliament in 2015 was the correct one. It allowed a person with a grievous and irremediable medical condition in an advanced state of decline in capability, such as somebody with motor neuron disease. It allowed such a person to access assisted dying, even if their life was not terminal within 6 months. And those people should have the right to choose, just as with someone who has a 6-month prognosis. I'm talking about people with Huntington's. I'm talking about people with mostly quite rare disorders that will end their life, but perhaps not until they have many more years of suffering they would prefer to avoid. So I would like the bill to be returned to its original form, not the version that was eventually passed, which involved compromises largely to get the Green Party on side.
So would you just list certain disabilities, not all disabilities or all conditions?
Oh, well, with respect, Bob, a disability does not qualify you to access assisted dying. That is totally untrue.
Well, if you don't take treatment, you could be terminal. Some disabled, that's why disabled people are scared of the bill, aren't they?
Well, again,
because their condition is terminal.
That's untrue. Once again, you have to be in an advanced state of irreversible decline in physical capability. Now, a person who has a disability, they may have declined at some point in the past, but they are not in a state of decline because they live with a disability. So again, I think it's really instructive that people who are opposed to the bill, for the most part, have been very quiet for the last 2 years because people can see that they spread misinformation. I'm really disappointed.
We haven't been quiet, that's for sure.
Well, no one's heard you. I'm really disappointed to see that you are still saying things that are untrue. when there are legitimate arguments. If you disagree with it on a spiritual basis, you should say that, but you shouldn't try and say things that are untrue. That is, for one thing, unchristian.
Well, I think most people disagree because of the vulnerability of people who are sick and towards the perhaps the end stage of their life or having difficulty. But are you saying to me that you would never consider mental illness as a qualifier?
I'm sorry, that the legislation explicitly excludes people with a mental condition. It says that you must be in an advanced state of decline in physical capability. Bob, I'm happy to have a debate based on the facts of what it says. But it currently excludes
terminal. People who aren't terminal, doesn't it? You're saying you want to bring back in terminal.
Well, I mean, I believe that it should say what it said initially, and that is that you should be in an advanced state of irreversible decline in physical capability, that it should not include a purely mental condition. That's what I've explained in my opening answer. And now you're, trying to
no, that's fine,
mislead
David.
people
that's a yes.
about not only the contents of the bill, but also my position on it.
No, that's fine. That's a yes to my question, which is great. Ate, your question.
Thank you, David. Are you wanting to remove the charitable status of churches? And if so, why and which ones? Because churches and Christian organizations have built up New Zealand society for generations through the generous donations of their members and hours of voluntary work.
So it depends what your activity is. Charitable activity should be tax deductible. And to the extent that churches are involved in charitable activity, they should find that that activity is tax deductible. But if you are running what is really a business and claiming that it is a charity, then I think you should pay tax on your business activities and then transfer money to the charitable arm of your organization. So Mission Estate's an example, Sanitarium's an example. I don't want to pick on those ones. If you ask for examples. But there's also a number of churches that you could argue are a lot more like a business than a charity that actively helps people day to day. And if they want to claim a tax credit, then they should have a charitable organization that practically helps people and is charitable purpose and claims the money back. And they should have a business side which pays tax like anyone else doing similar activities. Simply about fairness, that you pay the same tax based on the same activity.
So, David, which ones are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following the question.
No, you're talking about, taxing, removing their charitable status. So which churches and Christian organization are you talking about?
Oh, well, I've given you two examples. I mean, Sanitarium would be one, Mission Estate would be another that people have raised over the years.
Okay. So it'll be very interesting. It's, the amount of work that's going to go into that. Be interesting. Thank you.
I mean, if they're in business, David, and the money still goes into the charitable work, as it does with Sanitarium because it goes to Seventh-day Adventist, for example, Waipareta Trust are another one who seem to be doing very well business-wise, and they're a charity. So, does that mean that, are you saying churches can't make a profit, or can they invest in capital investment? It's difficult to draw a line, isn't it, on a church or a charity being in business?
Well, not really. I mean, if you're running a business, then you're running a business and paying tax. If you then want to transfer money to a charitable wing that does charitable work, then you can transfer that money. However, that doesn't mean that you can recycle capital within one organisation that has a dual purpose. That is unfair. When it comes to Waipareta, I think the Charities Commission is finally dealing to them, and not before time, in my humble opinion.
Okay, I have to ask this one because I've got a vested interest. Do you think Family First should have been deregistered?
Look, I'm not familiar with the case. I think that there is a real question around the role of tax deductibility in political activism in New Zealand. Certainly, I look at Greenpeace. Should they be able to have a tax deduction for the political advocacy work that they do? I guess it's a question, do you think that political advocacy is a form of charity? depending on in other countries, it certainly is seen that way, and you can get a tax deduction for a think tank, for example.
Hmm.
You can argue it both ways. I mean, political parties pay tax. You could argue that perhaps political parties should also be tax exempt. I don't really have a strong view on what the philosophy is. I just know that if you look like a business, walk like a business, then you should pay tax like a business. And if you have a charitable cause, sure, set up a secular organisation and give them the money.
Okay, you've made a decision to target a national seat, the seat of Tamaki. Interestingly, the current MP is one of the champions for free speech within the National Party. But have you just gone after him because he's pro-life and anti-euthanasia? Because why not have Brooke stand in something like Auckland Central, for example, that doesn't involve splitting the vote?
Well, let me just answer you with three ways there. First of all, there's no such thing as a national seat. Epsom's not an ACT seat. It belongs to the voters. It's their choice.
It was gifted by National to you, though, wasn't it?
Well, that's also untrue. I can't believe how one person can get so much wrong. But actually,
so National has done no favours for you in Epsom?
No, Act 1 at fair and square. So
no,
again,
has National's done no favours?
No, they haven't.
Okay.
Frankly, I find it that you can lie and then laugh at destroying truth. I actually don't know what the point of continuing the interview is.
Well, let's continue. Let's find a better question. Although, could we just ask, why are you targeting Tamaki? Is it because of the anti-abortion?
I mean, would you actually like to continue this interview on the basis of good faith and truth? Because otherwise, I mean, you've put out so much misinformation about how the End of Life Choice Act works, how it works in how similar acts work in other countries, about the history of seats. I mean, this. So, are you going to commit to being committed to truth or not?
Always committed to truth. So, why are you targeting Tamaki?
Well, basically, hang on a second. I mean, are you so you are committed to having a truthful exchange and discussion?
Yeah, of course.
You are. All right.
Well, David, I want to ask you.
I'll assume you mean. I'm assume you're saying yes. The second issue is people have asked endlessly, will you stand someone in Tamaki? The guy that we have there, we never hear from him. When we do hear from him, what he says is disgraceful. It is just embarrassing to our electorate. So that's the second issue. And the third issue is that ACT and National in that seat are polling over 70%. So mathematically, even if they split 35-35, and there's only one other candidate, that third candidate's going to get 30 and come third. So, the seat will be won by ACT or National, and based on everything we're hearing and the polling we're doing, I suspect it will be ACT.
How do you know he hasn't been present in the electorate?
Because that is the endless opinion of people.
Okay.
Well, actually, it's not
Michael.
somebody. It's person after person saying, when are you going to stand someone in Tamaki? And when you get that sort of feedback, you think maybe we should stand someone there.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, moving along, David. The ideology of diversity, inclusion and equity underpins much of New Zealand's legislation. For example, co-governance, conversion practices, Prohibition Legislation Act. Do you think that diversity, inclusion and equity is essentially destructive or helpful, or perhaps even just irrelevant?
Look, I think what's important is that we get back to our common humanity. There's so much focusing on people's superficial differences. There's not enough focus on people's actual common features. What actually unites us. And that is, we are actually all people who have 99.9% the same DNA. I'm not sure if you guys believe in DNA, but that's common to all people. And I believe that we've got to start focusing on what unites us rather than what divides us. And a lot of this DE&I, is fundamentally focused on trying to categorize people by superficial characteristics. I'm just opposed to that.
Thank you.
David, you supported the law, the conversion therapy law. It was voted for unanimously by ACT. It's a law that criminalises parents who may affirm their daughters as girls and their sons as boys and who refuse to allow them to go on puberty blockers. In fact, ACT MP Nicole McKee raised really good concerns around the role and protection of good parents who might reject gender ideology. So I'm just interested to know, why did ACT still support the law that puts parents at risk?
I think, again, it's, and here we go again, it's another mischaracterization. At the end of the day, what I looked at was, are there people who in the modern era are carrying out just really grotesque, the kind of stuff that I hope you wouldn't support, but at this point I wouldn't be surprised, pray the gay away, tell people that they're bad people and that they can be fixed for their homosexuality. So, at the end of the day, yes, there's always a possibility that any law would be misused, but when I look at that kind of activity, I just think it's time to ensure that there's actually some protection against that sort of activity.
Okay, but the law prevents people getting counselling that they personally want for example, unwanted gender ideology, gender dysphoria. That seems to go against a libertarian principle, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it does, to be honest. I think, again, I can see where you're going, but the law doesn't prevent somebody from getting counselling that they want. It prevents the kind of wacky stuff which, unfortunately, people are still subject to. And I started out very skeptical about this law, and then I looked at some of the recent cases, like within the last few years, of the kind of outfits that have taken kids and tried to tell them that being gay is a disease and that, with the right treatment, they can be made natural again. I mean, I'm surprised you're not more concerned about that than some sort of hypothetical abuse of the law for which there's no evidence.
So how many complaints have actually been made since the law was passed?
Well, if I look at the cases that were the justification for the law, I suspect that there will have been a few, but in any event, just because a law hasn't attracted complaints doesn't mean you shouldn't have it.
Yeah, well, there's been none. Ate, have you got a question?
Yeah, David, I'm not sure whether you're aware that outfits overseas in Europe, are banning these injection hormone puberty blockers because of the evidence of bone, problem with the weakening of the bones of these kids. I'm not sure whether you're aware of that. But it's not just what you're claiming that it's wacky stuff. This is scientific evidence of the destruction that is happening to these children. So I'm not sure whether you're aware of that, and that maybe I can send you some of them for you to consider, because it's not wacky. This is scientific.
You're now talking about a completely different issue. What is wacky is some of the pray the gay away retreats and camps where people have been, just predated on by absolute crazies that somehow, the likes of Family First don't seem concerned about. I think you should be. The second issue
That's misinformation there, David. Don't accuse others of it.
So are you saying that you are concerned about some of these wacky pray the gay away camps that have occurred
against all coercive, abusive counselling? None of that should happen. But what this bill does, it locks people into transgenderism.
So you are concerned about these pray the gay away camps,
abusive, coercive counselling. Everybody acknowledged that.
You are concerned about that. I mean, are you?
I just told you we're against abusive, coercive counselling, but people should have the right to determine the way they want to live their life and seek counselling for that. But you've voted to criminalise that, to criminalise people who want to seek counselling.
No, we really haven't. But in any event, I'm pleased to hear that you, even though it took a while, we got you to express concern for some of the other things that have been going on too.
Well, you obviously don't know what the law says.
Try and answer Eti's question.
Okay.
The simple issue, Ate, the simple issue is that what's going on with some of these injections, puberty blockers. I think they're introduced to kids at far too younger an age, and I actually think that we need to be asking ourselves who gets to make these medical decisions at what age a lot more closely, because people are being asked to make irreversible decisions at an age I don't think they're capable of. And I think there'll be a future time when we'll look back at some of this stuff, a little bit like we look at some of the old-fashioned views today and say, God, did we really have a time when people were that exclusive or that intolerant, or believe that people almost had to be chopped into one box if they didn't fit in the right one, and had it done surgically and chemically? That I think people will see as being wrong in future. You were supposed to be, I think 20 minutes, and I've got someone calling at 5:30, so I'm going to have to love you.
David, really appreciate your time, and all the best for the campaign.
Thank you, David.
I'm just sorry that so much of what you said wasn't true. It made for a much less pleasant discussion.
Seemed to go both ways, David. All the best for the campaign. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
It really did.
Cheers.
See you later.
Bye.